welcome everyone. This is the first in a series in Aspiring Women CTOs, and it's sponsored by Navoda and Better Conversations. It's also an event organised, as many of you all know, by RecWorks on behalf of Aspiring Women CTOs. Better Conversations, my organisation, my company, has dedicated one of our LWC X100 programme cohorts, which is based on a course that we run called Leaders Who Coach, and our goal and mission has been to train 100 leaders to become leaders who coach for free. And we've dedicated one of our cohorts to Aspiring Women CTOs, and this is kind of where this panel event kind of came from. That cohort has been sponsored by Navoda and RecWorks, and it came out of the fact that there are very few senior women tech leaders, and the desire to really change that landscape by inviting women in to build on their leadership skills. And so there was a natural kind of harmony between what we were doing at Better Conversations and what Navoda were wanting to achieve and RecWorks are wanting to achieve and get behind. And so in the application process for a place on the Leaders Who Coach programme, it became one of the things that came out really clearly was strongly highlighted by applicants was our avoidance for conflict, avoidance for confrontation seemed to be something that every applicant pointed to. It's not unique to women, I will say that, but it was a significant change in that, sometimes we see it in some of our applicants, but this was a consistent theme that came through. And so RecWorks thought, okay, let's challenge this, let's deal with this head on, let's actually address some of these challenges. And so we started with this one that really kind of resonated, it seemed, with a lot of women. And what we're hoping to do is learn from our guests today, and I will introduce them in a moment. And so we're going to be exploring the whole aspect of confrontation and conflict, and see what techniques have worked for them that we can learn from. And feel free to jump in and ask any questions as we go. I've got my chat open, so hopefully I'll spot those. I'm just going to do a double check and make sure one of our other guests, see whether she has managed to join us. Forgive me if I'm looking elsewhere on my screen. I'm just looking out for that at the moment. So our guests this evening are, I'll go around my screen. We've got Valerie Dryden, who is Head of Platform Engineering at Zego. She is also a Leaders Who Coach graduate, I will add, and a training executive coach. Is that something? Yeah. So that may be something that you can speak to, Valerie, in terms of maybe some things that you can see from a coaching perspective. That would be lovely. You're joining us from Edinburgh in Scotland. We've got a really international crew this evening. And then we have Daniela Lorenzo Rhodes, and you're a founding member and CTO of, I'm going to say this right, Tokyo. I should have checked this with you, Tokyo. And you're in Madrid, in Spain. You and I had a catch up earlier this week, so we'll flag some of the things that came out of that conversation. So you've been in that role for just over 4 years. And then we have Franzi Lowe. Am I saying that right, Franzi? Okay, cool. And you're a co-founder and CTO at Localize, and you're in Hamburg in Germany. So I did tell you we've got an international crew. You've been in that role for 4+ years from the start. So yeah, welcome everyone. Is there anything that you would like to add that I didn't mention? That's to our speakers, our guests. No, all good. Do correct me on anything at all as we go this evening. All right, so thinking about maybe some conflict situations that you have had. And look, we avoid conflict for lots of different reasons, right? Sometimes it's an individual one-to-one. I think Daniela, we were talking about there's conflict, different types of conflict. There's conflict within ourselves, there's conflict with another person, and then being witness to conflict between team members. So thinking about a past situation where you have found it hard to navigate a conflict, I wonder if our guests could share, reflect on, maybe share a little bit about what that conflict was about. Obviously, let's keep things anonymous, but if you could share a little bit of background as to what that was, and maybe a reflection on why you found it hard at that time. Daniela, would you kick us off?
Sure. Okay, so as you mentioned yesterday, we had a quick chat and we were talking about different types of confrontation. I myself haven't had direct confrontation as so like being hard to manage with someone else, but I have been in many situations where I've found team members that have had confrontation between them, or even confrontation within myself, growing into this CTO role where there's an uncomfortable situation and you don't know how to manage that with yourself, which is very common, especially when you're growing into this role. So maybe focusing on your team as CTO. I started, as you mentioned, 4 years ago in this role, and I went from being myself in the team, being the tech person in there, to having nowadays a team of almost 50 people that respond to me, or that are within my team. So we also work remotely. So just have this picture in mind. We all work remotely. We have team in the UK. We have team in Kenya. I see also a member from our team from before, from the past, is in this call, so it's awesome to see. And we have team in also Spain. That's where I am based right now, but we usually work remotely. So there's been situations where I've seen conflicts happening within our chat, which we use Slack in this case. And those cases are very difficult to locate because you're not present within the team. So you have to really identify when something is happening to be able to stop that before it reaches a further point. What I was talking about yesterday with you is I like to personally know my team, at least know how everyone reacts in different ways, how people, when they speak or when they text via the platform that we use, you can identify when something is slightly weird. So in this case, focusing on that path, I've had different moments where I've seen not nice ways of saying things, especially when they're written. You can not interpret them properly. So when you don't know someone personally, you can take things wrongly, and that starts a conflict within your team. So most of the times, first of all, obviously, is knowing your team, knowing when something can be out of place, and making sure you identify that before that goes beyond that point. Obviously, trying to hold that situation small, not allowing it to grow before it does, because obviously you always have your friends inside of your team, and that can escalate really quickly, especially if it's just chatting, like, look what this person said, look what this other person said, and that can really scale really fast, and that creates a really bad atmosphere within the team. So identifying that, being able to speak to that person and say, hey, I think you haven't expressed yourself properly in this case, try not to do this or whatever, or also trying to get those people that can be involved in that conflict and speaking to them one-on-one, Obviously, you need to know how each person is, because sometimes you just need to talk to them individually before you do it in a group. Listening is always something that you always need to do. Listen to all versions that can arise in a situation, because you can have or be inclined towards one opinion or another, but it's something that you should never, as a lead, show. Like, you should never say, yeah, I agree with you, that this other person is wrong. That is something that can never happen, or should never happen, even if you do have that opinion, because most of the times you do have that opinion. But you have to make sure that that doesn't seem like that, because it's not right to do as a lead, giving someone, saying someone, yeah, hey, you're wrong here, or this.
And why would you, why do you think people find it difficult? Like, because they end up responding online, or, you know, in the chat stream, and you know, it's strange, isn't it? Because when we've got an audience, things can really get out of hand quite quickly. You know, everything becomes a little bit more amplified. But why do you think people choose that avenue rather than maybe going up to someone and having a conversation?
I think it depends on the person. So if a person is actually that type of person that would go to you directly and say, hey, this has happened, or I don't think this is right or wrong, then a conflict normally doesn't occur. You know, it just stays there and that is solved. The conflict actually comes up or appears when there's no communication. So when it's a type of person that doesn't have that ability to communicate properly, or to not share their how they feel at some points, or just shy from saying, hey, I didn't like how you said this, or whatever. So I think a conflict, if it was a person that can speak to anyone and try to figure something out, then the conflict wouldn't happen as so. Right. Maybe it can, but it would be in a smaller way.
So potentially it's a connection, how close you maybe feel to a particular individual, whether you feel like you can go to them directly, versus not have trust. That connection. It's easier to throw something out.
Yeah, you can be trust with someone, or even the type of person that you are personally. So if you like to avoid conflicts and you like to speak things out, then it doesn't matter if you trust or not trust a person, or don't have that feeling with someone. You would just go to them and say, hey, hi, whatever, I'm this person that I saw you mentioning this. I think that's not the right way, or can we have a talk, or whatever. But there's other people that, even if you're close friends, that they just try to avoid that. They don't like having that conflict, and they just go other ways, you know, and that even makes it even worse.
Yeah. Thank you. Franzi, I'm going to put the same question to you, if I may. Just thinking about a conflict situation that you perhaps experienced and involved you maybe. And just if you could share with us a little bit around that, and maybe your reflection now about why that was difficult maybe, or why you avoided that, actually just having a conversation with someone.
Yeah, I would say, as a CTO, I'm in a constant conflict all the time. So my life is a conflict. And I have to say about myself, I'm a conflict avoider. So I can totally relate what you just said, Daniela. I'm the person shying away, or I used to be that person a lot. Before I started Localize, and before I became the CTO of this company, I was actually doing my PhD. So I was sitting in my university office all by myself, writing my research papers, and no one ever came to me apart from my professor. And I never had the situation to get into conflict. Also, like in my previous kind of life, I was always the person like that. I'm like a people pleaser. I hate it when people are upset around me. So for me, conflict is a super hard thing to deal with. It still is. It got better over time, because, as I mentioned, my life is a conflict right now. I think the biggest conflict that I had in the beginning, and I'm still having, is with my CEO. She's amazing. I have to say that in the first. She's also a friend of mine. We are three co-founders, and we are all three super different. She's a complete different than I to myself. She is like really confrontational when it comes to conflict. She wants to solve it immediately. She wants to kind of talk about it. she has no fear in expressing her opinions, and I'm the one like standing with the back behind the wall and trying to just shy away. So we had a lot of those situations, and for me, to be really honest, what helped me to get out of like this let's freeze situation, because literally I'm just freezing if there's conflict, is to understand that conflict is not a bad thing. To be honest, conflict is like a super good thing, especially if you are in an organization and a company and in a startup. Especially having conflict is something where you can grow, where the team grows, where like tension exists, and where from tension there's like innovation happening. And I always thought that conflict is something bad, but the conflict doesn't have to be bad. Of course, there are situations where you're treated maybe unfair, or where you're screamed at. Luckily, I never had those situations. I only had those like conflict situations where I had a different opinion than my CEO, and I still have a lot of times. And I always thought that having that disagreement within the team is something bad. But what helped me to get out of that is to understand conflict is really, really good. And you can have really good conflict situations if you have trust. So if you're not afraid of the other person's reaction to what you're saying, if you're sure that that person doesn't take it personally what you're saying to them, and if you don't say something personally, of course, then you can actually have really good situations coming out of conflict. And then in the end, it's about like coming to an agreement. You don't have to agree like 100% with the other person's opinion. Maybe it's okay to have like 80% agreement with them, and then you have one solution from that situation, and then you're both committed to that solution. So I think this is something important to understand, and it helped me a lot, that conflict is not bad. It doesn't have to be bad. If you do conflict in an environment where you have trust with the person that you are arguing with, actually conflict is something good.
So the reframing for you has been really pivotal in terms of seeing it as a way to actually deepen understanding. But there's key ingredients, aren't there? There's trust that's really important. But not being afraid to step into that. And that's something that I hear a lot, is a fear of offending the other person if I express a different point of view, or I raise a concern that people don't want to hear, but it's an important risk or whatever. So yeah, and then anticipating the other person's reaction to what we say, that can be a really tough place. Yeah. So yeah, interesting. So many conflicting, mixed things that are going on in our minds, aren't there, and feelings around that. Valerie, what about yourself?
Just to reiterate what Francie said, I think my entire job is managing people through conflict. I manage like 8 squads in a department of 100 people. My life is just conflict, right? But I guess, like, you know, being a woman in tech as well, right? You know, I've come through my journey in my career working with a lot of people who are very different to me, right? And you know, that could be like peer programming with people, or like, you know, we're trying to work collaboratively with people who, for the most part, don't want to see you and don't want to collaborate and don't give a damn about your ideas, right? So I had to learn at quite a sort of young age in my career how to navigate that. And initially, I am a recovering like people pleaser, Francie. I hear you, like that is me. And I had to go on a real journey with this until, like, you know, it sort of blew up one day when, like, you know, I had this like conflict with someone, and sort of like it's not as important as what I'm going to get to, so I don't want to dwell on it. But you know, I found the book Radical Candor and sort of learned that actually by standing up for myself and in support to them, giving them feedback, we could both get to a better place. However, just back to like original question, Seem, about a conflict that I actually have sort of learned from and sort of reflected on, like, why was that hard? So you're thinking, given that during my 17-year I don't like to talk about it, 17-year tenure, that, you know, actually I've gotten really good at this, and I have to a certain extent, right? So I learned how to coach, I learned how to navigate the space. But the one thing I realized I hadn't got good at was when people above me have a conflict with me, right? So if it's maybe a CEO, a CTO, a VP of Eng, like my boss, right? If it's someone who holds more power than me and they don't have the same personality type as me, so they're much more aggressive, they're much more assertive, they know how to like own their space, and they're not like, they don't mind talking for half an hour in a monologue. I'm like, wow, you are so different from me that I can't even like almost empathize with you. I can kind of like try to see the world from your perspective, but it's just not me. And I think like I had a conflict lately where someone was basically trying to take parts of my job off me and do them worse than me. I was like, oh, that's not really okay. But the person was a level above me, so it was really tough to actually have that conversation, to be like, this isn't cool. And I didn't do it because I was like back into like, oh, don't upset them, they're your boss, oh god. You know, and I went into that sort of turtle shell again. But inevitably I trained them that it was okay to use me as a doormat. And by the time I actually had the conversation 8 months later, like, it was too late, right? They had already learned that, like, yeah, it's cool, but I was just a doormat, which is wild given that with my line reports and my peers, I'm very candid, very open, very honest, and I love to, you know, in support to them, give feedback and talk through a conflict. So, and for me, I found that really, really interesting that, you know, I had that unresolved kind of aspect to me in a conflict situation.
Right. So yeah, and again, that, you know, we show up differently for our team members, and we play that role that we want to, because they're our team and it's the culture that we've created for them. But the rules change a little bit, don't they, when you're dealing with people maybe outside your team, peers, or your boss, where there's a hierarchy and there's a different power dynamic going on, and a different culture as well, right? You interact with your team in a certain way, and maybe you have a good way of, everyone knows when you hit a bottleneck or an issue, how to raise it and how to work through it. But that may not be shared from one team or function to another within an organization. Yeah. So I guess the question to open to all three of you is, what was the moment, what was the thought or the moment that you had that you thought, I absolutely have to deal with this. There isn't another option. To leave it be isn't something that that can happen. I actually do have to step in and do it. Do you recall what that thought or motivation or impetus was?
I can share it. I think the most obvious like sign on if you have to deal with it is if you're lying in bed and you're thinking about it constantly. I think this is already like the late stage. This is where like the shit hit the fan and you really have to deal with it. Hopefully you are able to solve it earlier. But if, like, for me, it was in that situation where I was lying in bed and I couldn't sleep, and I was like, oh my god, this is more than just like a normal work conflict. This is something where I have to talk to the person. So I guess this was my situation, and now I'm trying to avoid those situations and take the conflict earlier.
Right. Well, yeah, because that no one wants to lose their quality of sleep, right? I think especially as we get older, you know, sleep becomes really precious. So yeah, that's a massive flag. Any others? Any other sort of moments?
I think for me is when you reach that point of frustration, when you say, I quit. I don't want to continue with this. I've had enough. At the end, it's just your head just blows up and you just can't take it anymore. And at the end, it's what Francie was mentioning before. You have to learn not to take things personally also, because taking things personally is the worst option that you can go through, because at the end, you have to think it's just work. You can't just take that, because you take that home and it affects your whole personal life also. And that's when, at least that was my trigger to say, no, I have to stop this before. Yeah.
Yeah, so some definite clear moments when that's, you know, enough is enough. Yeah. Valerie, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd say for me, like, it was when I became really aware of my values, like how I wanted to show up at work and what it meant to be in my integrity and to command respect and to show up in a way that I was comfortable with. And when I got to the point where I was like, I feel gross in my heart and I don't feel like I'm showing up in a way that's authentic to me, then you got to deal with it, right? Because then I'm betraying myself, I'm betraying the person by not, or the team or whatever, by not showing up and doing the difficult thing, right? Like, you got to do the brave thing. You can't just sit there hiding, right?
Right. And I think that's very true. It's like, once you've seen something in a certain way, in the same way that Francie was saying, once you reframed things, it became an option rather than a sort of an arduous or difficult thing. There was a necessity or a value, intrinsic value. And so, yeah, honoring your values was the kind of, this doesn't sit like this and not on my watch sort of thing. to happen. That's quite powerful. Whatever that way of reframing things is very powerful. Mistakes. Have we made any mistakes? Do you recall a situation where maybe you didn't react or respond in the way that you now, with a bit of hindsight, think was the best way?
Yeah, I think this must have happened to everyone. At the beginning, you don't want to make anyone feel bad. So the only way that you think you can solve something is by like not telling them the whole truth and like making them think that they are right somehow. That's why I was mentioning before that don't stick to someone, don't make sure you don't say, yes, you're right, this other person is wrong. But yeah, that situation where you don't want to really go into that conflict and you just say, yeah, you're right, let's just do this way, just to please them, trying to please someone. I think that's a mistake that probably it's happened, or if not yet, it will happen to most of us. And at the end, it's just, you feel bad trying to, sometimes you have to be tough with someone, not rough or not even, you don't have to disrespect anyone, but you have to be tough, and that's your role at the end of the day. And for people to trust you, that they have to know that if you're going to say something, if you need to say something from what they have to learn, you will be able to say so. And reaching that point at the beginning was quite hard. But once you do it, then you're fine, and that's just you continue to do so. But trying to do that, it was one of the difficult parts for me at the beginning.
It's interesting, isn't it? That reminds me of what Valerie was saying also, just that if we don't respond, or we acquiesce, or we act the doormat, or we sugarcoat it and go along with something that actually where we needed to speak more truthfully about it, we're training people that that's okay. And then that there are consequences to that, aren't there? In that people continue to operate or interact with us in that way. And that becomes quite hard in itself to then break that cycle. Yeah.
And Valerie was mentioning that she had these issues with higher levels, which you can, but also dealing with that with lower levels. So lower levels need to also respect you and know that they can talk to you and they can share their thoughts or whatever. So it's difficult on both sides, even though obviously you shy when it's a higher role coming towards you, but you also need to make sure you know how to deal with situations below your role as well.
Yeah, so it operates at multiple levels. That can be a personality thing, right? It can just be a dynamic, a history. Maybe you've joined an organization later than other people, and they just have there's a history that already exists that makes it feel a little bit more challenging to step into and change that landscape. Okay. So you touched on it a little bit earlier, Daniela, the things that you look for as flags that a conflict is brewing. I want to put that to Valerie and Franzi. What signs do you look out for that that something may be not quite right, or a conflict may be about to kick off?
Do you want an answer in terms of like me to another person conflict, or like a other person to other person conflict? Because it's kind of the same but sort of different.
Well, why don't we start with the first one, the first option? Yeah.
Okay, so me to another person. I think something I've learned to pick up on quite quickly, which I wasn't very good at in the beginning, is behavioral changes. So, and it's definitely harder with people you don't know as well, but you still have to work with on a regular basis. Maybe they're getting more quiet with you, maybe they're getting more aggressive with you, which is actually kind of better because you can pick up on it, right? But the dangerous part is when there's like gossip or back channeling or stuff happening that you don't know, and there's like whispering going on about you and all this kind of stuff, and you find out third hand. That's the worst part for me. Is like, I should have picked up on this way earlier if I could have, then great. So for me, it's about like, how is this person's behavior changing towards me, and what can I, like, with my most generous assumption to this, not thinking like, oh, that person's just being mean or whatever, like, just trying to put my hat onto like, what could I have done? And just staying curious. And then, as early as possible, saying, hey, I've noticed like this kind of thing going on. Can you tell, or the story I'm telling myself, I love that. It's like Brené Brownism right there. The story I'm telling myself is this thing. Can you help me understand? Whereas like in the early days of my career, I would not spot anything to change, just be like, la, la, la. And all of a sudden you're just getting like yelled at.
Right. Right. So noticing some shifts, and sometimes they're quite small, and can be hard if you don't know someone. Tiny things. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's something that, you know, understanding and spotting disagreement certainly is something that we explored in Leaders Who Coach, right? It was the looking out for body language cues and shifts and changes in energy, and all of those things become really important. How about yourself, Franzi?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So I think I'm lucky enough to work in a really open and transparent company where conflicts immediately go on the table. I mean, that's what I hope, of course. We are like 75 people now, so it's still manageable, I guess. So hopefully everyone comes to me if they have a problem with me. But what you said, Valerie, also is totally true. But on the other direction, because I always think that people have like a problem with me or that they're angry with me, and then I like in the past I was always like, oh my god, what is wrong? And I like had like one day of like thinking like, oh my god, what did I do wrong? And then I asked the person, and they were like, you know, I just said it that day yesterday because I don't know, my cat fell from the balcony or whatever. Actually, that's a true story. So it's also, I think it's super important, like no matter what the situation is, just go and talk to the person and ask, hey, what's wrong? I think there's something going on here. I just want to check in with you if it's like because of me or if you just have a bad day. So I think that's also really important to understand. In 90% of these situations, it had nothing to do with you. It's just like their personal life that's going wrong at the moment.
Fascinating, isn't it? How we do that. We kind of assume or absorb responsibility for it, and it's not at all. And I think that's something you pointed to as well, Daniela, wasn't it? That knowing your people is really important to you, and the more that you know members of your team and get a sense for their mood and their energy and how generally they show up when they're on a good day versus, you know, having a crappy day, are real, that those things are really important, can help you pick up on signs early before it becomes a bigger issue, and it's manifested as a risk in another way. Yeah.
But I think it's also equally important, especially if you are a leader of the team, to not think about like, okay, people will come to me if they have problems, but really to create structures that those things can be said, like either you go directly to the person or I don't know what. And I think that one good thing that I found really helpful was like to have skip level meetings with people that don't directly report to you, but they're maybe like reporting to your team leads and the team leads are reporting to you. Doesn't have to be like every month or so, but like every now and then. I think it's a good thing to just like also get a sense on like what is the current climate in the team, and hopefully you can spot issues early.
Yeah. So, and that's a key part of your culture, right? To make sure that everyone's comfortable with that, and there's a transparency and they see the value in it. I do see some cultures, and I'm interested to hear your perspectives as well. A term that I've heard is artificial harmony. So for the sense where within a culture or an organization that everyone contributes positively, and that can actually stymie or have an adverse, an unhelpful effect, which is that no one will say when they disagree. So it's like you make a positive contribution, but if it's something that maybe is counter to what everyone else is agreeing on, then it causes people to actually hold back and not say anything. I wondered what your thoughts were about, you know, how much culture can affect how people contribute or not.
Well, I mean, there's no one is ever going to be super happy with everything. That's just something that's not going to happen, and it's impossible. Obviously, there is, if you have a coach in your company where things need to be harmonized, there's always ways and ways of saying things and expressing yourself. So you can match that culture by, even if you have an issue, because people always have issues, speaking up front, saying things out loud, but always respectfully in a constructive way, because people can be also destructive. If it's constructive and it's said properly, it can be
has anyone else lost Daniela there? Okay, all right.
Yeah, sorry, I froze. I think
you're back. Carry on.
Yeah. No, it was just saying that. So if at the end of the day, if you're able to say things in a constructive way, it's always that's a positive thing. So you can always have conflicts if they're treated properly. Then you can always meet that culture. But there's always going to be something that it's out of place or that comes out wrongly or whatever. Always you can have a bad day, as Francie was mentioning. Everyone has bad days, and sometimes you don't even realize, and you can say something that you don't even want to say and create some type of conflict. So you can try, there's loads of things that you can try, but it's sometimes people make mistakes, and that's something that you have to learn to deal with also.
We all do, right? Stuff comes out of our mouths and it lands wrong. It's not helpful or whatever, and it's not intentional. I think we can always backtrack. We can always apologize for something not coming out the way we intended, and that goes a long way towards kind of limiting a conflict getting out of hand, which leads me to sort of my next question, which is, you know, how do you have some techniques or approaches for preventing a conflict from escalating? And I guess this would be in the context of maybe witnessing it happening within your team. What do you do that might actually prevent a conflict from getting bigger?
I can maybe answer this one first.
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of this. It's very common, especially when your business is kind of lurching and pivoting, you know, like if you're pre-product market fit or whatever, and it happens quite a lot. I've had a lot of practice with this, and something I find that's really helpful, and not every company has it, but most of them do now, is like really strong company values. And I don't just mean like a poster that's like, we're professional and collaborative. Like, that doesn't mean anything, right? But you know, I've had values in companies in the past that's things like, we're in this together, or, you know, us before ego, that kind of stuff. And the thing I love about that is, like, if you're doing a values interview before people join your company and you're actually living and breathing it every day, then I can use that as like an actual sort of artifact that I can say, hey, look, I hear both of you, you're all dug in, you're passionate about this thing, but we need to remember we're one team here. So what's your objective in terms of the overall company goals? And, you know, we all want to be in this together and do the right thing for the company. What do we think the way forward would be? And I highly recommend reading a book called Leading with Questions, because it has 12 questions in it that you can step through in a sort of conflict situation, which I was like, this is gold. I actually have it printed off on my wall. So, you know, whenever I get into these kind of situations, I walk through those questions in my head and make sure I'm sort of getting both sides to think more about the wider view, the holistic view, and taking a time out and a breather if they need it. But for the most part, that's very effective, I found.
Right, and that's fascinating, because it's refocusing people on what's important here right now, right? And trying to step away from feeling emotionally triggered or charged about something, as you mentioned the word passion, and yeah, we get very attached to our ways of doing things or our approach and so on, and so having a way to remind ourselves of a different approach and why that's important is key. Francie,
I've genuinely seen grown adults yelling at each other about where an engineer was going to be in a team, like actually screaming at each other. And I was like, look, which company OKR is going to improve the most based on which team they're in? I'm like, oh yeah, that one. And it's like quite obvious where they had to go. It's like, come on, what's happening?
Right, that again, it's a reframe, right? It's but it's hard to see if you are involved in the conflict. If you're the one being passionate, that can be quite hard to step outside yourself. So incredibly helpful to have that other perspective, someone looking in and reminding us or making us accountable, right? Which is kind of what that is. Francie, did you want to say something?
I wanted to say, like, I totally agree. I think zooming out of the situation is always the best approach in solving. If there's like a really tense conflict where you think like, okay, there are too many egos involved here, this got too personal, just zoom out. And my co-founder Lisa, she always said, we are not doing surgery on an open heart. No one will die if we like don't get it right. So I'm not sure about your business, but at least in my business, like nothing will happen if there's a bug and we cannot solve it, or if we don't get that one thing right. So like just changing the perspective and like seeing the bigger picture, like, is always so helpful to kind of like step out of the situation and just like say, okay, whatever, we can find a solution. We have our company goals, we have our maybe quarterly OKRs, we have something that guides us in that question, that hopefully guides us. And if not, maybe sometimes you're also the leader of the company. Sometimes you just have to take a decision. If it's like a technical thing, I don't know, someone wants to use this ES winter rule and the other one wants to use this ES winter rule. I had so many situations where like, it cannot be that we're talking about that for 1 week. So maybe just, I'm just going to take this decision now because I'm the leader of this team, and I just, like, someone has to take the decision in the end. So I think that's also important.
It is. It's fascinating. It's a negotiation, really, isn't it? That's going on. It's just a really heated negotiation. Yeah. But we, maybe not seeing it in that way. One of the things that great negotiators do is step away before making a final decision, or at any point that the negotiation gets tough or emotionally charged. Some people talk about it as going to the balcony, or whatever your term is taking a breather. And sometimes that's 5 minutes, and sometimes it's 24 hours, right? Whatever that length of time is, sometimes taking a break in that way is helpful. Yeah. Daniela, did you want to say something?
No, I completely agree with the point of view. So at the end, it's also making sure that everyone feels heard before you do make a decision, and not just make a decision with just listening to one side or whatever. But yeah, I agree completely with both points.
And that reminds me of something that I think one of you said earlier, which was, I think, Franzi, you said you don't have to agree 100%. And sometimes it's about doing your due diligence, as it were, and laying out what you see as the issue or the risk. But at some point, it's kind of coming together and going, yeah, I don't 100% agree, but I've made my case, and I'm going to back what we continue and decide to move forward with. So that's in a sort of collective situation. Something I just wanted to share, because it's kind of top of mind for me, is from a cohort call this morning. We were talking about, when we disagree, some of us have a tendency to express it right away. And it can come across as quite hard or harsh if others are not expecting it. And then some of us kind of go quiet and choose to, buy ourselves more time to say, I need to think about that a bit more, rather than express a dissenting point of view or a different point of view. And we were exploring, actually, there's a middle way, which is to make the discussion more robust by inviting people into those doubts or concerns that you have, even if you don't have them fully articulated in your mind. Because I think that's one of the other scary things about being in a situation where you disagree with someone and you're avoiding conflict, is you don't have the words fully thought out in your own mind, or how you want to express them, or whether they're really true or not. And so we were exploring this idea that you can actually kick off a discussion and ask the people around the table, or the person in front of you, questions about how they think it aligns with the strategy or our company values, or do they have any concerns with this? And that might actually draw out a discussion that invites more people into it to have a more robust discussion about those potential risks. So I just wanted to share that and see what your thoughts were about an approach like that, and if you've used it.
I used to be quite impulsive, so I was quite something I didn't like, an idea or whatever, obviously depending with who. I was quite straightforward with things, and obviously sometimes you can make mistakes and you say things in a way that you cannot or shouldn't say. So yes, I usually use, most of my team, I always have, I think most of us in our C-level have few people that are key to us, which we discuss things with. And I have also my team, which I tend to listen to before making a decision. And at the end of the day, it's trying to take a breath before you do say something or make a decision at some point. Sometimes you have a very clear opinion and you can share that, that's fine also. But having your team and listening to other opinions, sometimes you don't even think about ways of doing stuff until someone brings up their way of thinking, and having a team that's different in each way, or people you work with or talk with in a daily basis that are completely different, also helps you make your mind grow. So have different ideas that maybe you on your own wouldn't even think about. So yeah, I share the idea of speaking with other people before making a final decision and listening to other voices and other opinions.
That can take the sting out of that initial reaction that we might have, right? Yeah. Anyone else? Francie?
I think it also helps to get buy-in on like any decision that would be made like at any point, because if people have the feeling that you include them in your thoughts and in the decision making, then the buy-in is higher, and then of course the commitment to the decision that you're like taking is better. And I think it's also helpful to just take a step back, and sometimes if you're not clear about your own opinion or about your own points, then like just talking to people is super helpful to just also like frame like an idea in your mind, and you get a lot of like new ideas on how you pursue that situation. So I think it's a really good approach.
Great. Yes, the other people's perspectives is always really helpful, and both of you made that point that you can learn something from that other from hearing that other perspective that gives you the language or the certainty about what you're thinking. How about you, Valerie?
Yeah, definitely have to reiterate what Daniela and Francie has said. And I think I'm quite a fan of like doing the opposite, where like if you've got two people and they're both pitching a different thing, I'll be like, okay, I want you to pitch for that thing and I want you to pitch for that thing. And it honestly leads to very wild and wonderful things. And you need a certain level of like trust and psychological safety to pull it off. But when you do, it's really fun. And I sometimes couple it with I don't know how many of you are familiar with liberating structures, but there's one which is 1, 2, 4, all. So you sort of get them to start and do some deep thinking themselves, and then they go with a partner, and then you get into a group of 4. But the interesting part is you've got to explain someone else's point of view during that sort of journey. So doing those two things together is a super fun ride if you can pull it off in your culture.
That's a great one. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, being able to see and have to express from someone else's point of view is a great technique. It's like role playing, isn't it? How might you do that? How might the other person be seeing that? I've just clocked the time, and we're fast running out of time here. And I want to make sure that anyone joining us, if you've got any questions, please do drop it in the chat. And also feel free to give feedback to what you're hearing. It'd be lovely to hear if what we're sharing, what our guests are sharing is resonating with you, is proving helpful. That would be lovely to know as well. So let me see, I have lots of questions still. Maybe a lovely thing there's been reference to radical candor and liberating structures, and I think there was another book, Valerie, that you mentioned. I would love to get some recommendations from you about external resources that you use, whether that's a particular author, writer, an expert or whatever, that has been really helpful to you in how you approach confrontations or conflict.
I second the Radical Candor book. That was eye-opening to me, I have to say, because that ultimately gave me the idea of conflict is something good. And I was on the ruinous empathy path like for my whole life, I think. So yeah, Valerie can relate. So that definitely, that book, and also because it has so many examples, and she also has a great podcast. So I'm also listening to her podcast. I can definitely recommend Kim Scott. The other one, which I find really helpful, is the Lencioni pyramid, where you have the trust level, then you have the conflict level, the accountability, commitment, and results, I think. or the other way around, I don't know. But that concept is also really good to understand, that you can have conflicts in the team. And if you have trust in the team, then conflicts can actually be something good. So I think like Kim Scott and Sione are the ones that I think are the ones.
Brilliant, thank you. How about you, Valerie?
Well, I mean, I'm sure most people know that I'm a massive Brené Brown fan, so I guess I'll get on my Brené Brown bandwagon again. So for me, Dare to Lead was like a huge shift in my mindset. And obviously leadership coach, you know, both of them equally as amazing. So Dare to Lead, though, really taught me about boundaries. It was something I hadn't really heard of or thought about much before. And you may be like, well, what's that got to do with conflict? Well, I realized that a lot of conflicts I was getting into that were prolonged was because I wasn't setting boundaries and being like, hey, this is okay, this is not okay, in a very respectful way in service to them and me. And it was just something I hadn't even thought about. I was like, no, I'd be the doormat. That's in service to the person. They're getting what they want. Everything's fine. I hadn't really thought that like I am also a person with needs and, you know, desires that is allowed to also exist, right? So her work has really it really awakened something in me that just wasn't there before. So I'd like 100 million% recommend anything done by Brené Brown.
Brilliant, thank you. And that reminds me, actually, in our conversation, Daniela, earlier this week, was, you know, especially as a woman who maybe is working in an environment where all your peers are male, there may be a different culture in the way that men talk to each other differently, it's making that distinction sometimes, isn't it, that actually this is the culture or the style of the way people exchange, and that might feel very different to our own style. So making the distinction between that being the culture or the way that people interact versus it being rude or being spoken to rudely. I don't know if you want to just share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so, well, as you mentioned, in our C-level, it's all male, and mostly, well, we're more or less reaching 50% female women in our company, but C-level is all men except for me. And also we have personal connections, so we know each other personally also. We're not just related to work, so there can be times where men usually tend to speak to each other if they get fed up, or the way they express themselves can be really rough, and men tend to take that in a way, and some women take it in a different way. So getting used to taking in those those lines that someone can tell you, and making sure you don't take those personally is something really key, because there can be some days where you're feeling away, I don't know, sensitive or whatever, and you get someone just screaming at you, and you like in the middle of a meeting full of a C-level, and you just feel like cracking, and you just say, oh God, I'm going to cry, or I'm going to burst, or I just want to stand up and leave this room. And that can happen to all of us in many situations, but also being in a C-level, when a situation like this arises, you have to learn to deal with it, because then if not, they tend to treat you differently, which is something that you wouldn't like to happen. At least I don't like being treated differently because I'm a woman, especially because I'm the only one. So learning how to deal with those situations where they're not screaming at you because you've done something personally yourself, it's just the way that they have of speaking, and learning when something is disrespectful and when something is just the way that things are being said, and learning how to control your feelings in those situations, it's really important as well. Just making sure, just knowing that they're not looking to hurt you or to make you feel bad. It's just the way that they have of expressing themselves.
Right. And that can also be something separate from gender. I mean, that could just be a person's style, right?
Yeah.
The way that they communicate. Some people are more direct and just like to speak plainly in facts, and some of us are, you know, the emotions can be a really big factor for us as well, and that's how we express ourselves. I want to invite Valerie and Franzi. Maybe Franzi first, if you would like to share your perspective on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, I mean, we are all female leadership, so I don't know how it would be like with male in the leadership team. but as I mentioned in the beginning, my CEO, she is like really direct and not aggressive in a negative way, but she's like really like more outspoken and like, and I think it's important also for her to recognize that I just have a different style of like dealing with such situations. And we had a lot of clashes in the beginning, where we weren't aware of the fact that we're just different in how we handle conflict. And then at some point we realized, and like we were like, okay, you need, like, I need my time to kind of, I don't know, go on the balcony. And she would love to like solve that conflict like immediately. She would like follow me on the balcony and like scream at me, like I cannot handle that situation. So we had so many of those situations until we found out, okay, we just have our own style of dealing with that situation, and we need to be respectful of that because we are just different in how to deal with that. And now I know that she wants to have an answer at least 1 hour later, and she knows that I cannot give her an immediate answer. So, and that's super helpful in a lot of situations.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Valerie.
I think this is a really complex and difficult thing between, is it toxic or is it their style? Because I've seen the opposite happen a lot to either coaching clients I've had or line reports, all of them not male, usually from marginalized groups. And what they do is they internalize bad behavior because it's just the way he is, or it's just the way they are. And that for me is like so not okay. And there's a really thin line there between like, you know, almost like toxic and illegal almost when you get into discrimination, right? And I think we need to be really aware, especially as women or marginalized people in tech, like what is okay and what's not okay, and what's actually like, you know, because I've seen in startups that I've been part of, or, you know, other companies that, you know, you've had a sort of boys club in the beginning that set up the company, and they don't realize that what they're doing is actually horrific. And I've seen women assimilate and become one of the boys because that's how they get ahead and stuff. And it's like, it's really heartbreaking and toxic and wrong. And I think it's something we all really need to cultivate an awareness of. And like I say, it's really difficult and really complex. Not an easy one at all. We could do an entire panel on it, I think.
I'm sure we could. I'm sure we could, Valerie. Yeah. No, well, it's fascinating. We are at the end of time, but I did want to come back to you, Daniela. And was there any resources that you would recommend people take a look at that's been helpful to you?
I haven't actually had a book related to conflicts. I did have a personal mentor, who I spoke this stuff with, which sometimes it's also good to speak it up. And also there's loads of people that have gone through the same situations that you have. So that's my take on that. And there is a book that I was recommended called Teen Topologies, which isn't related to confrontation or so, but it does help you to have a clear view of how to structure teams and see different things in your organization that can also help you, because sometimes issues can arise because of teams not being properly structured, disorganization within your company, etc., etc. So this book was one that I had recommended to myself, and I actually liked it. So Teen Topologies, if anyone wants to take a look at that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, fantastic. Thank you, Valerie, Franzi, and Daniela, for coming on the panel and having this chat this evening. I've really enjoyed it. And thanks to everyone who's joined us this evening. I think we have, there are some more panel sessions in the pipeline, so do look out for those on the Aspiring Women CTOs. I think LinkedIn group is posted there, but if you're in a community there, I'm sure you'll hear about it. Wow, brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.